The man who managed my money for 9 years took me to lunch twice a year and asked about my mother. He also stole from me in increments so small I mistook them for weather. By the time I was done with him, he had lost his license, his firm, and the only thing he had ever actually been good at, which was being trusted. His name was Robert Reese, and he had been referred to me in 2015 by a woman from my yoga studio who swore he had rescued her divorce settlement. He wore the same style of navy jacket every time I saw him, soft at the elbows, and he kept a photograph of his daughter on the credenza behind his desk, gap-toothed, holding a soccer trophy. He remembered that my father had died of a stroke and that I was nervous about outliving my savings. He remembered my birthday. He sent a card. I was a freelance medical illustrator, single, 46 when we met, with a modest inheritance and the careful habits of someone who had watched a parent die without a will. I handed Robert roughly $400,000 and told him I wanted to retire at 65, without being afraid. He nodded like a doctor being given a symptom he had treated 1,000 times. Every quarter, a statement arrived in a cream-colored envelope. I glanced at the totals and filed them in a drawer. The market went up, my account went up, more slowly, but up. I assumed that was the cost of caution. I assumed he was being careful with me. That was the first thing I got wrong. The crack came in March, during a dinner with a college friend who had become a tax attorney. She asked offhand what my portfolio had returned over the last 5 years. I said I wasn't sure, maybe 4 or 5% annualized. She set her glass down. She said the S&P had done roughly 12. She said it the way a doctor says a word you're going to have to look up later. I went home and opened the drawer. 9 years of statements, stacked like sediment. I had never read one closely. I had trusted the summary page, the little arrow pointing up. That night I started at the beginning and read every line. What I found first was volume. Trades. Dozens of them per quarter, sometimes more. Buys and sells in the same positions within weeks. Mutual funds swapped for nearly identical mutual funds. Small cap rotations that made no sense for a woman who had told her advisor in writing that she wanted stability. Each trade carried a fee. Each fee was small. Together, over 9 years, they were a second mortgage I had paid on a house that was never mine. I didn't call him. I didn't write him. I did something I had never done in my life, which was hire a stranger to audit me. Her name was Sandra Natarajan, an independent forensic analyst I found through a bar association referral. I sent her every statement, every confirmation, every email Robert had ever written me. I told her to take her time. I told her I wanted to know the shape of it before I knew the size. She called me 3 weeks later and asked if I was sitting down. I said yes, even though I was standing in my kitchen with the dish towel in my hand. She said the pattern was called churning. She said it was textbook. She said my account had been traded at a velocity that was not consistent with any legitimate investment strategy for my stated risk profile, and that the commissions generated on my account over 9 years exceeded $72,000. She said my underperformance against a reasonable benchmark was, conservatively, another $190,000. I sat down on the kitchen floor. I remember the tile being cold through my jeans. I remember thinking very clearly about the soccer trophy and the credenza. I remember thinking that he had sent a card on my birthday the previous October, and that by October he had already taken from me the cost of a small car. I didn't cry the way I expected to. I cried the way you cry when something has been rotting in a wall for a long time and you finally smell it. Quiet, almost relieved. For the rest of that night, I sat on the floor and let the grief move through me, and by morning it had changed shape into something else. I made coffee. I opened a new notebook. At the top of the first page, I wrote his full name, and underneath it I wrote the word evidence, and underneath that I wrote the word witnesses. I did not write the word revenge. I did not need to. The notebook knew. I understood in a way I hadn't the night before that calling him would be the worst thing I could do. He would apologize. He would offer to make it right. He would count on the decency he had spent 9 years studying in me. The only way to hurt a man who traded in trust was to refuse to give him the conversation he was expecting. I decided, on the kitchen floor at 6 a.m, that Robert Reese would never hear my voice again. The first move was Sandra. I asked her to produce a formal report notarized, suitable for regulatory submission. She said she already had. The second move was the forums. I had remembered vaguely seeing his name mentioned in a thread on a retirement board years before. I went back and searched. I found 2 women. One was in Ohio, a widow named Marguerite, who had written a post in 2021 titled simply, "Is my advisor stealing from me?" She had been told by a different advisor that her returns looked low but had not known what to do. The other was a woman named Joanne in Pennsylvania, who had written 3 posts over 2 years describing the same pattern of pointless trades and vague reassurances. I messaged both of them. I told them what I had found. I told them I had a forensic report. I told them I believed we had been sharing the same thief. Marguerite called me within the hour. She had lost, by her own estimate, nearly $300,000 across 11 years. Joanne called the next day. She cried. I didn't. I had done my crying on the tile. The third move was FINRA. I filed a formal complaint with the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, attaching Sandra's report, my full trading history, and a sworn statement. I filed an arbitration claim against Robert and his firm for the full amount of damages plus fees. Marguerite and Joanne filed their own complaints within the week, each referencing mine, each attaching their own analyses that Sandra had, at a discount, prepared. There was a moment, around week 6, when I thought it might not work. Robert's firm responded to my arbitration claim with a letter from a lawyer suggesting that my losses were consistent with market conditions and my own stated risk tolerance, and that any perceived churning was in fact active management I had authorized by signing the standard advisory agreement in 2015. The letter was polite. It was also, I realized as I read it, the exact language of a man who had done this before and escaped. For one long afternoon, I believed he might escape again. Then I remembered something. In year 3, Robert had emailed me to recommend a specific fund rotation, and I had written back asking him to explain why. He had answered in writing that the move was for tax loss harvesting purposes. I pulled that email. I sent it to Sandra. She confirmed that the trade in question had generated no tax benefit whatsoever and had in fact triggered a short-term gain. It was a lie, in his own words, on his own firm's letterhead. I forwarded it to FINRA. I forwarded it to my arbitration counsel. I forwarded it to Marguerite and Joanne, who found similar emails in their own archives within days. I wasn't the only one who had stopped trusting him. The fourth move was the regulators in his state. The fifth was a journalist at a regional business paper who had written 2 years earlier about advisor misconduct in the Mid-Atlantic. I sent her the outlines of the story, 3 women, 1 advisor, 9 to 11 years each, with documentation. She asked for a week. She took 3. The collapse, when it came, was not loud. It was administrative, which I have come to understand is the worst kind of collapse for a man like Robert, because there is no one to argue with and no one to charm. FINRA opened a formal investigation in August. His firm, notified of 3 simultaneous arbitration claims and a pending regulatory inquiry, suspended him in September pending internal review. By October, they had terminated him, citing, in the public disclosure filed on his broker check record, violations of suitability and supervisory standards. The disclosure was 2 paragraphs long. Anyone who searched his name would now see it forever. The journalist's article ran in November. It named him, it named the firm, it quoted Marguerite, who had agreed to speak on the record, describing the birthday cards. It did not name me at my request, but it described my case in enough detail that anyone in his life who read it would know. His wife, I later learned through a mutual acquaintance in the yoga studio, read it on a Sunday morning, and did not speak to him for the rest of the day. In January, the arbitration panel ruled in my favor. They awarded me the full churning damages, the underperformance differential, and my legal fees. Marguerite and Joanne won theirs within the month. Robert's license was revoked by FINRA in February. He could not work in the industry again. The soccer trophy daughter I heard had to transfer out of her private college. I did not feel triumphant when the check arrived. I deposited it at a credit union into an account managed by no one but me. I bought 3 index funds. I set them on a schedule. I have not looked at them more than twice a year since. Sometimes, on the anniversary of the night I read my statements on the kitchen floor, I think about the birthday card. How he must have sat at his desk, signed his name, addressed the envelope, and felt, I imagine, nothing at all. That is the part that still sits in me. Not the money, the card.